where we're going to start tonight now is I'm going to just share quickly, why do we have these meetings to begin with? For many, many years now, in the weeks before the Maryland General Assembly starts, JUFJers in every district where we have enough JUFJers to have a meeting, have these pre-session meetings with our legislators. And as you'll see on the slide in just a minute, and this might be familiar to some of you, we in JUFJ really believe in the power of local organizing, and in particular, really believe in the power of small groups and small numbers of people being able to affect really big change. So you can see on the slides there some examples from the 2018 primary. We also have some more recent examples from 2022, this past summer, where in Montgomery County, the county executive, Mark Elrich, won his primary by 32 votes. In Frederick County, for a county position, the vote differential was literally a single vote. It was one vote. Now, as you can see on the slide, right, small numbers of committed people, whether that's JUFJers, whether that's folks from the Poor People Campaign or a multitude of other groups, matter, even for relatively safe legislators, right? They don't want to get primaried, both because it's embarrassing and it costs money. And when we're thinking about our districts, the size of our districts, the total number of votes is small. So in District 11, which is Claire's district, I think, the votes are roughly 9,000 to 11,000, which really is not that many. So JUFJ and all of us as like people that are committed to making change in our region, need people power, right? We need organizing to make the advocacy that we do powerful and effective. So you can see again on these slides on the screen that a handful of people really is the difference between legislators feeling their jobs are fun and validating, hearing from their constituents that they're doing a good job, they're fighting the good fight, they're picking up important battles, or having a really big headache, right? Their constituents calling and saying, like, you aren't showing up, you aren't doing the right things, we need and are expecting you to be better. Also on the slide, as you can see, right, we have this rule of thumb, organizer math, that for every one person that calls or writes a letter to their representative, there are another 10 people who aren't making that call, who aren't sending that letter, who aren't writing that email, who agree. And our electeds know this math as well. So they know when they get, 10 action alerts from JUFJers or from other folks in the community, there's 100 other people who agree, who are there, but just aren't sending that letter. So knowing this, knowing the power of small groups of people, these legislator meetings are really, really important as part of our larger strategy of district organizing. As we'll talk about a little bit later this evening, these legislator meetings are really, really important in allowing us to build relationships with our legislators, for them to understand what JUFJ cares about and what we're advocating for, while also allowing them to share with us what are they caring about, what's on their priority list. And these meetings strengthen JUFJ, right? As an organization, as a grassroots organization, we thrive, and we really need like the passion of people to do all of this great work. So in a second, I'm going to pass it to Claire to share a story about her experience in legislator meetings, why she participates, the power of them. But before I do, Laura, curious if there's anything that I've left out.
Just one thing that I want to just hit extra hard on that we're really focusing on talking about as much as we possibly can this year is that if we think about the work of JUFJ, part of the work is about the advocacy and part of the work is about the organizing. And the organizing is about building the people power that we need to have in order to make the advocacy for the things that we care about effective. And so when we think about the legislator meetings, they're a really powerful example of where the organizing meets the advocacy. So we organize to have the people power, especially constituents who live in the districts of our legislators, to meet with them to advocate for the issues that we care about. And so I'm just really excited how this whole process of the legislator meetings really lives into those twin goals of the organizing and the advocacy.
Great, thanks, Laura. And Claire, we'll pass it to you.
Thanks, Eliana and Laura. So when Eliana asked me to share my experience participating in meetings with legislators, I think the one thing I wanted to convey, especially to people that haven't done it before, is that it is so clear that these pre-session meetings with lawmakers really matter. They really have an impact both in the near-term session in which we're engaged, but also building relationships over time, which is building the people power that makes change happen. In my first meeting in 2015, I have to say I felt very intimidated, and I had a sense of overwhelm that here I was with a group of people, some of whom I knew, many of whom I didn't, that we had to convey a lot about substantive legislation that we wanted them to address. And then my anxiety dissipated because I found that we were so well prepared and well organized, and that most importantly, no one in the group has to be the expert on an issue or a piece of legislation. We were all rowing the boat together. And I also came to realize that legislators really appreciated the opportunity to meet with us as their voter constituents, as people who lived in their districts, and as people who are part of JUFJ, which has become a statewide movement of Jews and partners in making change in Maryland. So they recognize that we're different from the paid lobbyists they see every day in the halls, because we are constituents who are leading these meetings with them. And we are prepared to do that. That we come as thoughtful people who have substantive points to make about campaigns and specific bills. They also, in turn, have the opportunity to share their legislative priorities. We always ask, so what are you looking forward to in the upcoming session? And this year, with a huge change in Annapolis underway, we imagine they'll have lots of new and exciting things that they have in store for themselves. And they want to be able to talk about that with people who live in their districts. So through that kind of exchange, we always learn important information, and we learn to anticipate what may or may not happen in the Maryland General Assembly in those individual meetings that we can then feed back to JUFJ staff, who can then convey it back to our other organizational partners, which has been very helpful. So these meetings are really a win-win for us and for the legislators. But JUFJers are there on a weeknight to talk about legislation that may or may not directly or immediately have a personal impact on our lives, whether it's eviction or protecting immigrants or assisting returning citizens from prison or people who have been abused by police. We are there to help make Maryland a better place for all. And our legislators really have come to recognize that. They know we're doing this out of a commitment to manifesting Jewish values that repairs our broken world. And so often I have seen legislators their eyes light up when they realize we're not there about an issue that is about a district or a personal problem we're facing. It's about making our whole state better for all. And I will say the best is when lawmakers who have begun the meeting saying, oh, I have to jump off in an hour, actually become so engaged with us, they end up extending the meeting. So everyone is frustrated with the direction our society and our world is going in these days. And people do a lot of venting to each other online. But when you're participating in this pre-legislation meeting, you are walking the walk to make change happen through these meetings. And I know legislators recognize it, and it really makes a difference in how they do their work and how we do our work. So I invite you all to participate fully and to invite others to participate as well. A friend, a neighbor, someone you know is like-minded, who maybe is venting to you about how terrible the world is. Say, come with me and we can make change together. So that's my experience.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much, Claire, for sharing that story and how your experience of pre-session legislator meetings have been. I feel inspired and ready to get to work. Also, what you said is going to dovetail really beautifully into what I'm about to share. You talked about the preparation and you talked about what comes out of these meetings and how we share it. So I'm actually going to spend a couple minutes now walking you all through the preparation pieces. I just want to say that it's a lot of material. And we have found over time that the people in our community, different people want different amounts of information going into a legislator meeting. So I'm going to spend the next few minutes showing you all a lot of stuff. And I just want to invite you to be excited to dive into the things that you're excited to dive into, and feel free to leave the rest. What I don't want anyone is to feel just overwhelmed or like you need to master all of the details and all of the information. This is purely so people can opt into and use the amount of information that feels supportive to you. My other caveat is this is an election year, and it means all of our timing is different. Normally, when we do this training, we actually have all of our issues finalized. We have all of our legislator one-pagers and everything else already confirmed. But because of the timing of the election, what I'm going to do now is actually walk you through last year's materials as opposed to this year's materials. Things will look very, very similar for this year. And when we have our next round of training, which is after Thanksgiving, November 30th, then by then we'll have actually all of the updated information with this year's issues and this year's legislators. But we didn't want to lose the opportunity to at least show you so you know what to expect once everything is finalized by the end of the month. The one other piece that I want to share is, in order to make it as user-friendly as possible, we will provide a Google folder per district. So you will only need one link to your district's district folder. And in that one Google folder, we'll have all of the materials that I'm about to share with you, which we really find is helpful to people, to only having to keep track of that one link. And then everything you need, you can find in that one link. Okay, those are all my preambles. I'm going to share my screen so that we can go through things one by one. We're meeting with legislators. We need to know who the legislators are and a little bit about them. So to that end, we have created these one-pagers about each of the legislators in each of the districts where we hold pre-session legislator meetings. And these have been developed over time to give you the information that we think is most important for you to come into those meetings. So this is an example from District 46 in Baltimore City. Again, this is as of last year. We are in the process of updating all of these for this year, but you can see it has some biographical information, a little bit about their history with JUFJ. It has their committee information and other leadership roles. Again, because it's an election year, the committee information that we have at the pre-session meetings might change by the time session starts, and it might change again during session because we expect there to be a lot of change and turnover this year, especially because there's a new governor's administration coming in and a lot of people in the legislature will be going to new jobs. So we'll go with what we know until it changes, and then we'll change the materials. It also has all of the contact information. We want to empower you as a constituent to know how to be in touch with your legislators. And then it has some key things that they care a lot about, because it's helpful when you're building relationships with legislators to know where their focus is, and also some key bills that the legislators have helped pass. Again, a lot of times as you're building those relationships, having that little bit of information is really helpful as a way to understand how we're in communication with them, how we're building those relationships. We do ask that these be kept inside for JUFJ purposes only, and then it has the updated date. So there are those for each of the legislators that we have. Clearly, this one needs to change because Brooke Learman is our new comptroller, and we'll be sharing those out so folks can review those before you meet with legislators. Any questions about those before I go on to the next set of materials? Great. Okay, so that is like the snapshot. The next thing I'm going to show you is a little bit of a deeper dive. And again, this is for people who would like to get even more information about their legislators before the session. So what you're seeing here, this spreadsheet, is what comes out. It is the result of all of the pre-session meetings. We'll take notes in all of the pre-session meetings, and we'll turn all of those notes into a master spreadsheet. And this spreadsheet is used by JUFJers and by our partners to understand what all of the legislators we met with, you can see these are all the people we met with last year, what they said about all of our key issues. So if you look down at the bottom of the spreadsheet, the first page, this is what everyone said about paid family medical leave. The second page is what everybody said about court and prison reform, and so on. You can go and see who your district is. So for instance, for David, for District 14, could see, Senator Zucker was supportive of the Juvenile Interrogation Act last year, which was a bill we worked on last year. Maybe he'll be supportive of the auto charge bill that we're working on this year that also has a juvenile justice component. So again, this is really meant for folks that want to take that deeper issue dive and know what their legislators said about issues last year to help inform what we think they might say about issues this year. Any questions about this document? And again, this is purely optional for people who want to get that deeper dive. And then at the end of all of the pre-session meetings this coming year, we will create the same spreadsheet for this year based on all of the notes and share it with you all and share it with partners so everybody can see what all of the legislators said coming out of this year's set of meetings. I'm going to go to number 3. So again, this is for folks that like a deeper dive. This is how the legislators voted on the bills that we were focused on in the previous year. So again, if we want to say, okay, let's see, I'm going to try to show this a little bit more, here. So for the Time to Care Act, if we want to see how, if you want to go down and see how your legislators voted, this will be arranged by district number. We're still finalizing it. And then you can go down to your district and say, oh, on all of the bills that JUFJ worked on last year, how did my legislator vote? And what do I think that that might mean for how they'll vote this year? And you can see here, and Joseph Galula, who's on the call, helped to create the spreadsheet and made the beautiful color coding. So it's really easy at a glance to see who voted for what. And this is, again, a way for it to just help empower you to know what you need to know, that you choose to know about your legislator coming into those meetings. Again, this is purely optional for those who want that deeper dive. Any questions about the vote spreadsheet?
I have a quick question. Is
Yes.
it just the final vote that you record, or you record all the committee votes as well?
So, Joe, do you want to actually answer how we approach that, since you know this better than anyone?
Yeah, I'd love to. So this records every step of the way. So for every bill that we track it all. We track the sponsors of every bill, as well as the sponsors of a cross-listed bill that might not make it, every committee, every House and Senate vote. And if there's a veto override, although I don't think that there were any because this year, so yes.
Exactly. And the one nuance I'll say there is if there were multiple House votes, like the House has second reader and third reader, it only records third reader. It doesn't record second reader. So to say that in the simplest way, the final vote, any step of the way, is the vote we record. So the final vote in committee, the final vote on the House or Senate floor, to make sure that we're really capturing how they voted on those final versions of the bill. And the committee votes are especially important, as well as the sponsors, because sometimes the bills don't move all the way through, and knowing how a legislator, whether they did sponsor or co-sponsor, whether they did support it in committee, is helpful in understanding their positionality. Abby, and then Louise.
Yeah, I just wondered if you had a training on how these committees work exactly. For example, I don't know what House third reading means. So do you have some?
We do.
Good.
That training is our Annapolis Academy General Assembly 101. So normally we offer that training this time of year, but so much is going to change in the General Assembly because of the new administration and the new legislators, many of people will be shifted in committees. So we're going to actually offer that training just after the first of the year. I think it's January 4th or 5th. Eliana can grab the link for that and put it in the chat. And then again, we'll offer it again later in January. And in that General Assembly 101 training, we'll go over the terminology, the steps of how a bill becomes law in Annapolis, the different chambers. We'll go through all of those details. Great, Louise.
I just want to reiterate, since I've done this 2 or 3 times, that these documents are incredible tools that it's like having a GPS and a roadmap that helps you get through. And I want to encourage people not to worry about trying to memorize a whole bunch of data that you're not going to necessarily use, because it also pertains to other districts or other committees. You will eventually, as we're getting through the session and the pre-sessions, you'll develop a sense of what you need to know so that you can enable the work in your advocacy. So they're wonderful. It's great to have these.
Louise, thank you. Yes, 1,000%. We have people that have been doing this like Louise and like Claire for years and years and years. And the longer you do it, the more you sort of know all of the different kinds of information you might want. And for the people that are like coming to this just for the first time, then for sure, feel free to really focus on, this overview of your legislators and don't worry about getting into the other documents. We preview them in this call to make sure that when you see the district folders, you know what's in there, and then you can opt into what feels right to you. Okay, 2 more things I'm going to show you, and then we're going to move on to other pieces. The first is, so now that was really talking about our legislators and what they said and what they think and what they have done. This is talking about our issues. And so this is really the way that we help you have the information you need to understand the issues and the campaigns that we're working on. So this is what we call a one-pager that focuses on our issues, and its audience is the JUFJ community. So we have one of these for each of the issue areas we work on. It talks about, our Jewish framing, why we care about it, who's impacted, the committees that are involved, the legislative details, and anything else that you need to know. So again, this is from last year for the Time to Care Act, but we create these for each of the issue areas. And again, you do not have to memorize this. No one's going to test you on this, but for folks that want to dig a little bit deeper into what issues we're working on, this is a resource that we provide to you. And then the last thing I'm going to show you is this is the version that is for JUFJers. We have a very similar document that's meant for legislators. So this is what the legislators get. And we really, as you can see, this is from the end of session last year. So it has lots of bill numbers on it. The thing the legislators need is the bill number and that 6 words about what it is. So they really know what it is we want them to vote for. And then we go into more detail with them as well about why we care about these issues and what we want them to be focusing on for each of the different bills that we work on. So there's a version of it from JUFJers, a version of it for legislators. And one of the things we'll do at the legislator meetings is share the updated version of this document with the legislators so that they can really follow along as we're talking to them and see what the bill numbers are, where we have bill numbers, and what the issue areas are. So this is a way to support that communication between JUFJ and the legislators and help empower them to have the information that they need to support our advocacy priorities. I just showed you a lot. I hope that Louise and I have really reiterated that, utilize what's helpful and ignore what's not. Any questions about those one-pagers before we move on to the next piece of our agenda? Yeah, go ahead, Jane.
Yeah, how will these be made accessible to us? I know they're in a Google folder. Will you email us?
Yes. So
Okay.
again, we're updating everything right now for the new session. So we will be, everybody who's participating in a legislator meeting, we will make sure that we email you your district folder that has all of the information that you need, including what we're about to do, which is the detailed agenda for your specific meeting. Every meeting has its own unique agenda to meet the needs of your district and your legislators. And that agenda will be in that district folder as well. And we'll get that email out to everybody as those materials are finalized.
Awesome, thank you.
Oh, I have a question. Before the legislator meeting, is there some kind of planning meetings beforehand?
Abby,
Yep, go
hold on to that thought. In just a second, you'll see on the sample agenda that we look at, before each legislator meeting, in the half hour before a legislator joins the Zoom call, JUFJers will be on Zoom and do a quick, this is who the legislator is, if anybody doesn't remember, this is how the meeting is going to go. And then, of course, staff and district captains, especially staff, is available to talk through in greater detail in advance of the meeting, any questions that are coming up for folks in a particular district.
And Eliana will talk more about this in a minute, but the next Annapolis Academy session at the end of November and beginning of December is especially meant for anyone who's going to have a speaking role at the legislator meetings so that we can really prep people for that. So there's multiple layers of prep. There's this meeting, there's the training for the storytelling and asking questions, and then there's that prep right before the meeting. And by having all of these layers of support, that's how we help everyone feel really, really prepared when that meeting starts.
Great. So we've just spent a little bit of time looking at sort of the prep materials, right? What is everything you might want to know, emphasis on might, before going into the legislator meeting. We're now going to spend a little bit of time like thinking and looking at the structure of the legislator meeting itself. And the same caveat that Laura gave about the election, pushing timeframes back a little bit. This sample agenda that we're going to look at is from last year. And now that we know who our electeds are, we're settling on our priority issues for this year. Very soon we'll have those agendas that Laura just mentioned for each district for this year that we will be sharing with folks. So the agenda that you get will look very, very similar to this. And I want to just spend a second on the meeting goals, right? We talked about it at the start of the call, but just to say again, why do we have these meetings, right? You can see on the screen, there are a multitude of goals, but to simplify, we want you as constituents to know your representative, and we want our representatives to know JUFJ. We want to be deepening our relationship with legislators, to be sharing our priority issues. And as we'll talk about more as we're looking at some of the later bits of the sample agenda, we want to be knowing how our legislators are thinking and feeling about the issues that we work on, both in terms of like, do they support this bill? What's their analysis of what will be needed for the bill to pass? Or where might potential obstacles be, and strategic advice around how we can be the most effective advocates possible. And of course, in these meetings, we are representing JUFJ and being advocates for our families and our partners. And just to say out loud, right, two things that we are not in these legislator meetings is negotiating with legislators, right? It is not our role to argue with them on the details of the bill or to be talking about amendments, that type of thing. And as we'll talk about later, our role in these meetings is also not to be issue experts, right? There are a lot of people that know the intricate policy details of many, many things. Our role in these meetings, as we'll talk about, is to be constituents that are passionate, that are ready to talk to their legislators about why and how they care about these issues. So scrolling down a little bit. Great, thank you. As the meeting begins, as we talked about, in that first 30 minutes, there'll be some time for reminders about the legislators, reviewing and confirming roles, making sure that everybody feels really confident going into the meeting about why we're there and what we're doing. And once the legislators join the call, there will be, of course, a welcome and framing. The framing that you see on the screen will probably be shifting a little bit to just be appropriate for being post-election, especially because some of our legislators are new. This is going to be the first time that we're getting to know some of them. And we'll also be bringing up the issue of hybrid testimony in the framing portion of the agenda. And for folks that are maybe less familiar with what I mean by hybrid testimony, we can circle back and say more about that later. So the specific campaigns that we talk about this year are going to be different from last year, different from what you're seeing on this screen. But the format of how we talk about them is going to be the same. So as you can start seeing on the screen, thank you, Laura. A JUFJer is going to share a story of why an issue is important to them. And this is really, really important. JUFJ really deeply believes in the power of storytelling as a really effective mode of making change. At our Issues Our Legislators, that training that Laura mentioned, we'll be talking about this in a lot more detail. But I want to say clearly that like this story of why we are here as individuals, why we're in this work, is really key to the meetings. It's not ornamental. And after we share that with our legislators, we'll be asking them questions. And these questions generally fall into two buckets. Although, right, depending on your district, depending on your legislator, there might be other things, but generally speaking, we are asking legislators if they will support a priority. And particularly if we know that they support it, maybe they co-sponsored the bill, maybe this is an issue that they have been like a very clear leader on for a number of years, we'll be asking legislators to share their analysis of how we can be effective advocates on the issue. So like I just alluded to, if you haven't told a story in a legislator meeting before, we, JUFJ staff, JUFJ leaders, offer a ton of support. The next program in our Annapolis Academy series, as Laura said, Our Issues Our Legislators, is really, really focused on being a storytelling training and having time to be drafting and thinking about the stories that you might want to tell. We also offer one-on-one coaching with staff and other leaders if that's helpful. Right? I know that sometimes sharing these types of stories might be new or outside of our comfort zone. And it's really important, really powerful, and is something that we invite you to step into. So after we have that time in the meeting to be talking and asking our legislators about our issue priorities, as you'll see on the screen in just a second, and as Claire and others have alluded to, legislators also have time to share their own priorities, right? To tell us what they are going to be working on, what they're excited about, bills that they might be introducing in the coming session. After that, We normally take a screenshot to make sure that we all know that we were there together and close out. After the legislators leave the Zoom, JUFJers will stay on for a very quick debrief. And this is really important because the meetings are jam-packed with lots of different information. And we want to make sure that we as JUFJers are capturing what did we think about how that went? What's sticking with us? And especially what are the things that we want to be following up on? And we want to be doing that, right, while the memory of the legislator meeting is really fresh in our minds. So for JUFJers, right, there'll be that pre-meeting component, the meeting itself with the legislators, and then a very quick debrief to capture any immediate areas of follow-up and reflection. So I just said a lot very, very quickly. I'm curious, especially for folks that have done legislator meetings before, if there's anything that you all would like to add, or Laura, if there's anything that was missing. And then after that, I'm going to pause for any questions that folks might have. Yeah, Abby.
I'm just trying to figure this out. I had signed up for a certain issue I was interested in. Are there like meetings about those issues? Or I'm just trying to figure out how that fits into this. If you've, said you were interested in a specific issue.
Yeah, that's a great question. So at our Issues Our Legislators, there will be time for people that are interested in a particular issue area. If you said, I'm really interested in immigrant rights, at our Issues Our Legislators, there'll be time to get familiarized with what JUFJ is working on this year, and then to think about the story that you might want to tell connected to that issue. Beyond that, outside of the scope of legislator meetings, starting in December, we're going to have community meetings starting in December and then continuing throughout session. And the purpose of those community meetings is, one, for JUFJers to be able to come together throughout session in order to get updates on how the bills are moving, what's happening on the issue areas, if there's any additional issue education that we want either from JUFJ or for our partners. Those community meetings are a really, really valuable space for making sure that we all feel educated and empowered to be taking action together.
Am I on? Yeah, I'm curious. I'm not sure how to frame this, but how does JUFJ determine their position on a particular bill? Is it just a matter of yes or no, or if there are parts that are supported and parts that are not? Who within the organization makes that determination, and are we bound by that in the meetings with the legislators?
Yeah, Laura, curious if you want to take that one. I'm happy to as well.
Sure. So JUFJ, all of our work is really centered in the work in our coalition spaces and together with our partners. There's nothing that we work on by ourselves. Our entire model is a coalition and partner-based model. So all of our positions are based on the coalition positions. So for instance, if on the renters issues, we're working as part of Renters United Maryland, and on immigration issues, we really take our lead from CASA, which works in the immigrant community, both locally, but also nationally as well. We really look to folks that are closest to the problems that we're working on. So when we're working on renters' rights, what is it that tenants are really asking for? If we're working on court and prison reform, we work with a group called Out for Justice that organizes people who are currently or formerly incarcerated. And what are the things that they are really wanting to focus on, and how do they see we should be addressing the issues? And so by looking to the partners, that have that firsthand experience of the issues that we're working on, then that helps us figure out our positions. And so, as Eliana said, in terms of the meeting guidelines, we don't negotiate during these meetings. We come in knowing what our partners in our coalition spaces are asking for. And if a legislator has questions or has pushback, we can always take that back to the coalition partners. And we really ask people that are coming into these JUFJ meeting spaces to be respectful of those asks by our partners. So even if it's not 100% how you would want to solve a problem, or 100% how, you know, you think, well, maybe this part of it, and I don't mean you specifically, I just mean generally, right? Anyone who participates in meetings, it might not be how each of us individually would think, well, that's exactly how we would try to solve the issue, but we just want to, the power is being together, the power is the people power. And so we add our power to our partners. And so our job is really to amplify their voices. And the one other thing that I will say is that the way we get this is our 9th cycle in Annapolis. So those coalitions and those partners that we work with are relationships we've been building for years, and really have a long time set of investment in the issues, in the partners, in the coalitions. And so when we looked this year at deciding what issues we were going to work on, we honestly didn't start from a blank piece of paper to think like, what are all the things we might want to work on? What we started is saying, this is our 9th year. There's all of this amazing work we've done and all of these amazing relationships we've built. Let's go to those partners and those coalitions, find out what they're working on this year, and figure out from their priorities where it makes sense for us to focus our time. So we, together with our Maryland core team, which is our leadership group of volunteers at the state level, compiled a list of possible issues to work on at the state level. And for those of you who attended the kickoff, back on November 2nd, what we did at the kickoff was we presented that list of, I think it was 16 possible issues to the community, and had times and breakout groups to talk through them and try to understand what they meant and what it might mean to work on them. And then people filled out basically a survey to show what they were interested in. Again, Joseph on this call crunched all the numbers of all of those forms, so we could see where people in the community were excited to spend the time. And then this week, staff and our core team has been going through all of those responses from the kickoff to kind of try to map out, what are our partners asking us to do? What is our community excited to do? And how do we make sure that we do like a pretty short number of items so that we have enough time both to be really good at the advocacy and to do that organizing and base building that we need to have the people power we need to win. So I am excited. I think that next week we'll be able to announce what from the kickoff is moving forward as the issues that we're working on. And we really try to make it's a coalition and partner centered process, but very much informed by the interest and the excitement of our community. So that's sort of 2 different ways to answer your question, but hopefully that helps.
Thanks.
Great. And Jay, what types of issues do our partners look for to us for our position? I mean, you know, really, that's not the way that, that's not really how the dynamic tends to work on our issue areas, right? They will talk to us about our political analysis. They'll talk to us about questions of strategy. They'll talk to us about, like, you know, focusing energy, like where, you know, what do we think from our experience of doing this for 8 years? Like, what do we think it makes sense to do in terms of which legislators to talk to, or where we have relationships, or who else to bring in? Like, maybe that's a coalition that would be stronger if we brought in other groups, and JUFJ has a lot of relationships, both at the local and state level, and maybe we can use our expertise to bring in other groups. Something else that we do for our partners is we have a lot of expertise on things like, you know, like Abby was talking about, how do we know about like how a bill what does second reader even mean? So we have all these civics educations programs that we offer to our partners as well as a way to help them, empower them to do the work that they do. So, so what they look for us to do is that kind of partnership, as opposed to looking for us to sort of say, this is the issue that you should work on this versus this other issue. So Jay, I hope that helps to answer the question. Oh, great. The one other thing that I just wanted to mention, where people do look to us specifically, and unfortunately, this is happening more often these days than any of us would like to really, at least that I personally would like to really believe, is when there are moments of anti-Semitism, and that can look a lot of different ways. That can be anti-Semitism as it just happened in Bethesda this past week, where really terrible graffiti was, where there was really terrible graffiti, showing violence towards Jews in Bethesda in Montgomery County. It can also look like last session, then Delegate Dan Cox, who then ran for governor, in the middle of a hearing, he actually espoused the great replacement theory that says that, that Jews are trying to replace white people with people of color. It is very much a conspiracy theory born out of white supremacy, and has also been used many times for people to attack or, commit violent acts against Jews. And so when Dan Cox said what he said, JUFJ wrote a letter both to the Speaker of the House, Adrian Jones, and also to the committee that Dan Cox was on at the time, to make sure that they understood what it was that he said, why is anti-Semitic, why it's dangerous, and why it endangers the Jewish community, but also the Black and Brown community, and that none of us are going to be safe unless all of us are safe. And so in those moments where that machine of anti-Semitism works to divide people, to create fear, to make it impossible to do the kind of change-making work we want to do, then that is a time where partners really do look to us for leadership, and it's really important that we play, a powerful role in those moments. It's a lot. Deep, hard stuff. Any other questions about either how we select our issues or how we talk about it in legislator meetings, or anything of these other pieces that we've talked about so far?
I think if people think about it in terms of if there's an issue that they care about and they have a speaking role at the legislator hearings, what you're going to be talking about is not the data and the economic theory behind whatever we are proposing or advancing. We're going to be talking about why it's important to us. And in my experience, it comes in one of two ways. It's either because we've had experience with the issue, because we know people that have been impacted by it directly, or it is through our Jewishness and the lens and values that we have that drive our passion on these issues. And I think that is something the legislators hear enough from the lobbyists. What they want to hear is about the grassroots people and what we all think and why these issues are important. It's more important to them to hear our stories.
Yeah, thanks, Louise. We really try to make sure that our stories, our values, our Jewish tradition, all of that is incredibly powerful and is really unique in terms of what we as a community bring. So I want to just, as Avi reminded us, it's almost 9 o'clock, and we promised that you all would be done by 9:15. So I just want to shift gears to the next piece of the agenda. And this is where we're going to sort of take all of the things that we've learned about legislator meetings and talk a little bit about your role. This is not a meeting that staff leads. This is a meeting that staff helps support you and preps you for you as constituents to lead. So that means that we really need constituents in all of these different districts to take roles in these meetings. So the meeting, normally we would be able to tell you when your meetings are scheduled, but because of the election, those are still in the process of being scheduled. So we know when we ask you to sign up for things that it's dependent on okay, Laura, Eliana, what are the date and times of our meetings? And so we know that we can't tell you that yet. So as we ask you to fill out your interests of what you might want to do in the legislator meetings, we know, of course, that it's dependent on the scheduling. I will say that that the meetings are going to all be on Zoom with one or two small exceptions, but you can, for almost everything is going to be on Zoom. So as you're thinking about what your participation is, then you can know that it's within the context of a Zoom meeting. And there are a number of different roles. There's roles including, as Eliana said, the welcoming. There's those telling stories and asking questions, asking the legislators about their issues, and also taking notes. And the notes role is, you know, not the role that everybody sees. It's a behind the scenes role, but it's incredibly important. The one last document we're going to show you tonight is this is what the note-taking form looks like. We try to make sure that, you know, again, you have all of the pieces you need. And as you can see here, this is not a transcript. You do not need to write down everything the legislator said. What we want to do is write down the points, the main points about what they say about each of our different issue areas. So we can put that in that spreadsheet and share them with leaders and partners. And there's a section here for each of the issue areas that we'll discuss at the meeting. All right. Okay. Any questions about the roles? I did already put the interest form into the chat, but before we invite all of you to fill out the interest form, any questions about the roles as we've discussed them tonight? Okay, so then let's take a couple of minutes, like 3 minutes or so. And if people can open up the link that is in the chat, Eliana just put it in again. The form should not take very long. And basically, these are things that you're interested in doing. This is not like an oath pact. If it turns out you can't, or you know, something changes, that's totally fine. We just want to make sure that we know what you're interested in so we can connect you to the meetings in the way that is going to be most meaningful to you. So,
and I'll also just add, right, part of the form is room for you to say any like additional questions you might have. So if you're like, maybe I would want this role, but I feel like I need more information, or if there's any sort of other questions that you have, things that staff can tell you or help you understand, definitely feel free to be putting those things. They can be really specific, they can be nebulous, and we will make sure that we follow up with you.
So Kathy, my co-captain, and I were talking, we were kind of breaking down who was going to do what. And broadly, I'm going to send out the invitations to the legislators because I'm the one with the closest relationships with them and probably can get the date settled more quickly. Kathy's going to take more of an instrumental role of working with Eliana in terms of getting people, recruiting them to take roles. And sometimes it comes because they have actually filled out an interest sheet. And sometimes somebody has registered. We find out the person is registered, and one of the captains may call them up and go over, or, you know, and just say, is there, of all these issue areas, is there something you really want to speak about? Or do you love taking notes? We love people who take notes. So it is not a one fit glove fits all, but it gets managed. It all makes sense and it all gets managed, and it's with the strength of the staff, the core team, and the co-captains that the puzzle gets put together.
Absolutely. Thank you, Louise. And thank you to all of the district captains and many, many other people that work very hard to put all of the pieces together. Great. So you have attended tonight's session. Yay. What's next? So you'll be receiving a follow-up email from staff, most likely from me, with this recording. So if there's anything from tonight that you want to revisit, great, you will have the recording and can do so. We'll also be including some of the links that we shared. And again, we'll be making it really clear that those links are for reference. they aren't the documents for this year. And as we already discussed, staff is working very hard now that we know who our electeds are, and we are very close to finalizing our issue areas, to pull together all of those resources that we looked at towards the beginning of the call. And once those issue one-pagers, legislator one-pagers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, are done, we will make sure that everybody has them in easily accessible district folders. So you can have your eyes open for those as well. We've mentioned it a couple of times, but I really, really want to invite and encourage folks, if you are considering taking on a speaking role in a legislator meeting, you're interested in asking a question, if you're maybe interested in telling a story, please join us for our Issues Our Legislators. Laura just put the link in the chat. You'll see there are 3 different times being offered for the program. That's so the maximum number of JUFJers can attend as possible. You only need to sign up for one of them. And this training, I think, is my favorite training of the whole bunch. If you are familiar with storytelling, if it's something that's totally new to you, I think it's just a really incredible skill and something that our legislators really connect with and find really powerful, right? Because they're used to hearing the data and the facts and the figures. So it's really important and resonant for them to be hearing from their constituents in a different mode.